Every time you toss a plastic bottle or can into a recycling bin, you probably think you're helping save the planet. But here's the truth. Most of those items don't get recycled at all. They're dumped in landfills, burned in incinerators, or shipped overseas for someone else to deal with. Meanwhile, a handful of corporations have turned this broken system into a $100 billion empire. Recycling isn't really about saving the earth. It's about selling you the illusion that you are. Today, we'll uncover how America's most trusted green habit became one of the biggest lies of our time and why we still believe it. The green illusion expanded. Recycling has become one of the most universal habits of modern life. Walk down any American street and you'll see the same symbols. The blue bins with the triangular arrows, the green labels promising eco-friendly, the slogans reminding us to reduce, reuse, recycle. It's a ritual so ingrained in daily life that few ever stop to question it. Drop a bottle in the right bin, and you've done your part, a small act of responsibility that connects you to something bigger, something noble. That's the image we've been sold for decades, recycling as a simple, elegant solution to our mounting waste problem. It's supposed to be the bridge between consumerism and sustainability, proof that we can keep buying, keep throwing away, and yet still live in harmony with the earth. The message has been clear. Recycling is not just good for the environment, it's essential for the future. But underneath this polished surface lies a far more complicated and unsettling truth. Recycling, as most of us practice it, doesn't work the way we think it does. The system is riddled with inefficiencies, contradictions, and outright deceptions. Mountains of so-called recyclables end up in landfills. Entire shipments labeled as recycling are quietly burned or exported to developing nations already drowning in waste. And yet, the story of recycling persists not because it's effective, but because it's profitable. This isn't an accident. The recycling industry has been carefully shaped over decades, not just by governments and environmentalists, but by some of the world's largest corporations. Companies that profit from plastics, packaging, and consumer waste have invested heavily in selling us the idea of recycling, even when the reality falls apart. They've turned an environmental crisis into a branding opportunity, shifting responsibility from corporations to individuals and cashing in along the way. The result, a $100 billion global empire built not on solving the waste problem, but on convincing us that we already are. Recycling has become less about the planet and more about perception, less about reducing waste and more about maintaining consumption without guilt. In the chapters that follow, we'll trace the rise of this green illusion. We'll uncover how recycling was marketed into existence, how it transformed into a business juggernaut, and how the comforting arrows on your plastic bottle mask one of the biggest environmental lies of our time. Because the question we must ask isn't just whether recycling works. The real question is, who does it work for? Chapter 1, The Birth of a Lie. The modern story of recycling didn't begin in the way most people imagine. It wasn't born from grassroots environmentalists or from a sudden wave of ecological responsibility. It was born instead out of corporate necessity and, some might argue, corporate deception. By the late 1960s, America was drowning in trash. Plastic packaging was exploding in popularity. Fast food was spreading and disposable culture was taking root. Landfills were filling faster than ever, and environmental concerns were starting to reach the mainstream. The first Earth Day was celebrated in 1970, and public outrage over pollution and waste was mounting. People were demanding accountability, and they were pointing their fingers at the companies churning out mountains of single-use plastic.
For industries like oil, plastic, and consumer goods, this posed a serious threat. If the public began to see them as the villains, governments might regulate them, limit production, or even ban certain products. So these corporations devised a strategy: shift the blame. Instead of asking why companies produce so much waste, the narrative became, why don't consumers dispose of it properly? It was in this climate that one of the most famous public service announcements in American history appeared: the 1,000 971 Crying Indian commercial. In it, a Native American man paddles through polluted waters, tears streaming down his cheek as trash litters the landscape. The ad ends with a stark message. People start pollution. People can stop it. It was a powerful image and it worked. Millions of Americans took it to heart, believing that litter and pollution were the result of individual irresponsibility. But here's the catch. That campaign wasn't created by environmentalists. It was funded by a corporate group called Keep America Beautiful, whose members included Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and the American Can Company. The very industries producing disposable bottles and cans were the ones telling consumers to clean up the mess. The genius of the strategy lay in its simplicity. Corporations weren't to blame for waste. You were. Soon, recycling bins began popping up in communities across the country. The Chasing Arrows recycling symbol, which now feels universal, was designed in 1970 by a college student during a contest sponsored by a packaging company. Almost overnight, recycling became the socially responsible thing to do. What most Americans didn't realize was that only a fraction of what went into those bins could ever truly be recycled. Behind the scenes, the same corporations funding these campaigns already knew the limitations. Internal documents from plastic and oil companies revealed decades later showed that executives were well aware plastic recycling was neither economically nor technically feasible on a large scale. Yet they continued to promote it as the solution, because it kept public anger at bay and allowed production to grow unchecked. The birth of recycling wasn't just about waste management. It was a brilliant act of marketing, a way for corporations to protect their profits while appearing environmentally responsible. And it set the stage for one of the most enduring illusions of modern consumer culture, the belief that our individual actions with a blue bin could fix a system designed to create waste in the first place. Chapter 2. The Business of Waste. Once recycling had been sold as a civic duty, it didn't take long for it to become a booming business. Today, the waste management industry in the U.S. alone generates tens of billions of dollars each year, with recycling as one of its key pillars. But while citizens imagine their bottles and cans reborn into useful products, the reality is more like an elaborate commodities trade. Here's how it works. When you toss something into a recycling bin, it's collected, sorted, and sold to buyers who turn it into raw materials. Paper and metals often find markets because they're relatively easy to reuse. But plastics? That's where the illusion cracks. Sorting them is expensive, contamination is common, and the resale value is low. For many waste companies, it's cheaper to bury plastic in landfills or burn it than to truly recycle it. Still, the system remains profitable not because it's efficient, but because the costs are passed down. Municipalities often pay huge sums to waste contractors to handle recycling, even if most of it never makes it into new products. Taxpayers believe they're funding an environmental service, but in practice, they're funding a business that thrives on appearances more than results. Meanwhile, corporations use recycling as a shield. Beverage companies, for example, can keep producing mountains of single-use bottles as long as they point to the existence of recycling programs as evidence of responsibility. Whether or not those bottles ever get recycled is almost irrelevant. The existence of the system is enough to deflect criticism. In this way, recycling transformed from a supposed environmental solution into a profitable industry, sustained by perception, contracts, and consumer guilt. Behind every blue bin is not just a public service, but a marketplace where the real product being sold is peace of mind. Chapter 3. The Export Scam. For decades, America's recycling system survived by shipping its problems overseas. Mountains of plastics, paper, and metals were bundled, labeled recyclables, and loaded onto cargo ships bound for China. On paper, it looked like a solution. The U.S. claimed high recycling rates, while China turned some materials into cheap goods. In reality, much of what was shipped was contaminated garbage, food-soiled paper, mixed plastics, and non-recyclable trash often ended up dumped or burned in Chinese towns already burdened with pollution. Communities far from American suburbs paid the price for the illusion of recycling success. In 2018, China finally drew the line. Through its national sword policy, the country banned most foreign waste imports. Overnight, America's system was exposed. Without China to absorb its trash, bales of so-called recyclables piled up at U.S. ports or were quietly diverted to landfills. The truth was undeniable. Recycling had never been about creating a closed loop, it was about exporting responsibility. And when that option vanished, the cracks in the system widened for everyone to see. Chapter 4. The Plastic Myth. If recycling has an Achilles heel, it's plastic. Unlike glass or aluminum, which can be recycled repeatedly, most plastics degrade in quality after a single cycle if they're recycled at all. The reality is grim. Less than 10% of all plastic ever produced has been recycled. The rest lingers in landfills, oceans, and even inside human bodies as microplastics. Yet, for decades, corporations promoted the idea that plastic was recyclable. Industry documents later revealed a hard truth. Oil and chemical companies knew large-scale plastic recycling was uneconomical from the very beginning. Sorting different resin types, cleaning them, and processing them cost more than producing new plastic from raw oil. Still, the famous chasing arrows symbol appeared on nearly every plastic container, quietly suggesting recyclability. Consumers were left to believe they were making an eco-friendly choice. While companies continued producing more plastic each year, this myth has been one of the most powerful tools of the recycling illusion. It allowed corporations to frame plastic not as a pollutant, but as a material with endless life. In reality, it's a material designed for disposability, masquerading as sustainable. Chapter 5. Winners and Losers. Every industry creates winners and losers, and recycling is no different. The biggest winners are the corporations and contractors who run waste services. Giants like Waste Management and Republic Services earn billions in collection fees, sorting contracts, and landfill operations. Whether the material is recycled or dumped, they profit either way. Corporations that flood the market with disposable packaging also win. Beverage companies, for example, keep producing billions of single-use bottles while pointing to recycling programs as proof of their environmental responsibility. It's a shield that costs them little but protects their brands. The losers? Ordinary taxpayers and municipalities. Cities spend millions running recycling programs that often fail to recycle most of what they collect. When markets for plastics collapse, those costs are quietly absorbed by local governments and, ultimately, by citizens. Then, there's the environment. Oceans filled with plastic debris, communities living near landfills, and developing nations forced to handle waste shipments all pay the hidden price. The recycling industry isn't designed to balance the scales. It's designed to ensure the winners keep winning while the costs are pushed downstream. Conclusion. The Big Lie Unmasked. Recycling was sold as a simple answer to a complex problem. For decades, Americans believed that tossing bottles and cans into a bin was enough to save the planet. But behind the green arrows was a business model built on shifting responsibility, exporting waste, and protecting corporate profits. The truth is unavoidable. Recycling, as it exists today, was never designed to solve the crisis of waste. It was designed to make us feel better about it. Yet illusions can't last forever. The cracks are showing, the costs are mounting, and the truth is harder to ignore. Real change won't come from hoping a broken system suddenly works. It will come from rethinking how we consume, demanding accountability from corporations, and supporting policies that prioritize reduction over deception. So the next time you drop something into the bin, remember, your actions matter, but only if they're matched with pressure on the industries behind the waste. The lie of recycling has lasted long enough. Now it's up to us to decide whether we'll keep believing it or start demanding the truth. Don't just recycle. Question. Refuse. Demand better, because the future won't change unless we do.